welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This is the month of September, and in September there's World Suicide Day and Recovery Month. Some statistics, real quick. The United States has increased the rate of suicide since 2018 by 37%. However, that number fluctuates, but the number, it's very minimal. But it hasn't consistently decreased. Some of the countries that are having the hardest time with the highest suicide rates include South Korea, and I'm actually half South Korean, so this number does is concerning. But as we pay tribute and we're thinking about the idea of day more, we're remembering that each life matters. It's not just a number. So in that context, I always like to bring in new insight, bring in new guests, and I have a new guest today. Her name is Karis. I just want to say thank you for coming on, sharing your insights, sharing just being part of the conversation. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Just a short disclaimer: if you are in the States, 988 is the Suicide Crisis Lifeline. But wherever you are in the world, I do encourage you to find what resources work. I don't like reinventing the wheel, so if there's a group, there's people that you are comfortable with. The biggest thing I always say, working in the mental health field, is if you can't say, I need help, then try to find an environment where you can say that, ask that question. So thank you. I always segue by bringing up quotes. This month, I think about Robin Williams. Obviously he passed several years ago, but he had this quote. He says, I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone. What comes to mind when you hear this quote?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I was just having a conversation with a friend a couple days ago, and she told me that when she feels most alone is when she's in like larger groups, where just kind of feeling a lot of loneliness, and not only groups where she doesn't know people, but groups where she does know people. And so I was just kind of thinking about that. And, I think that probably is a common experience for a lot of people, just feeling like unknown in those circumstances, because I think a lot of it is we just, we want that intimate connection, and that doesn't happen a lot in large groups, even sometimes in smaller groups, when we don't feel like we can be vulnerable or be ourselves. And the other thing that came to mind when I heard that quote is a song that came out a couple years ago, which says it's called Truth Be Told. And it just talks about how, a lot of times we say we're fine when people ask, even though we're really not, because that's what we expect. People want to hear, right? They don't want to hear my problems. They don't hear my troubles. Like, how are you? I'm good. Even though inside, there's probably a lot of hard things going on, which even kind of makes that gap, I think, larger and more of a feelings of isolation. And like, I have to put up this face to say I'm okay, even though I'm not. And I think we've all been there.
Yeah, that brings up the idea: is it more important to appear that you're doing well or actually doing well? A lot of times when I'm working with clients, it's a difficult one because we are very much superficial in our conversations. We could be around a lot of people. Like, how's the weather? Oh, it's great. It's great. Everything's great. Too many greats, nothing's never really substance. You say a lot, but not really say anything at all. You probably had those conversations. There's this barrier, I don't want to tell either because I don't want to be a burden to the other person, or maybe I don't trust. There's something there. And I do feel that Robin Williams touches upon it, because I don't think proximity is always the thing. You could be around a lot of people and feel worse,
Yep.
And I feel sometimes, just verbiage-wise, it's not always bad to be alone. Sometimes it's good to kind of have those times by yourself to reflect, but there's something about loneliness that can be insidious of how we view our value, how we view ourselves, and how we how we proceed forward. I think it's just a verbiage thing, but word wise, some people are introverts. I know I'm kind of mixed. I don't know about you. For me,
Mm-hmm.
I find that I can be a social butterfly, but I get exhausted very quickly. So it's just like that mixed baggage. Um, but in that sense, I think environment plays a huge part, especially when we're thinking about this month paying tribute to those who are struggling, the families attached to those who are struggling, those who have lost someone through someone completing suicide. I know myself being touched by that. I just, what are your thoughts? What when you think about environment? What comes to mind to you, and what do you think has worked, or have you seen yourself personally, or what you've seen around you that has been helpful in gaining stability in the environment?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a huge thing, like you said, is trust and safety, right? I think in order to be vulnerable, you have to feel like you're in a relationship that where there's honesty and trust, and you're in a in safety also,
Mm.
and then also being in a place where you can really be who you are, right? I think there's a lot of times for me, I think I've been in seasons where I've felt so broken. It's almost
Mm.
like I don't want to admit it to myself.
Mm.
It's hard. It's hard because when the words come out of your mouth, like, and it becomes more real. And
Yeah.
so being in a place where that can feel like you're sharing that with someone else,
Mm.
and they're taking some of that, right? So when you share something that's really hard, the person who's on the receiving end is in a way is going to take some of that burden, right? It's going to
Yeah.
share that burden. And so I think that's huge, right? How that is handled the first couple times when you become really vulnerable is going to kind of set a tone for how
Yeah.
you can expect in the future. And so, but I think also, like, if you're with the wrong person, because I think there's people who may not be the right right people to share your pain with, and then you have to realize, okay, this is not me. I can still open up, but maybe choose someone else, maybe choose a different environment, choose a different group, choose a different individual. And also just knowing yourself. Like you said, some people are more extroverted. Maybe group settings are better for them. Some people more introverted, more. And also in my life, I have really learned how to. I'm a Christian, so I relate to God. I pour out my heart to Him. The Psalms are a great tool, I think, of expressing hardship and difficulty when you don't always have the words. And so, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned, even though Revive Ministries doesn't proselytize, I do encourage, me myself, I'm a Christian, but I think when it comes to, for me, I wasn't always a Christian, and what really brought to me, it was that everything changes, whether you like it or not. And one thing I liked about, faith and something bigger than myself, it doesn't change. It's kind of reassuring, especially when you're in the valley versus, and you're just like, just one more day, as opposed to like this month is suggesting, because sometimes just surviving one day can do a lot. And that's basically, things peak at times. I do also like what you also mentioned, that of when you're it's different, when you think about environment. But I think the hardest thing that I had to realize personally, and this is just my own context, is not everyone's going to understand. So the expectation levels has to be there. So when I have a friend, or I'm sharing with a friend, or I'm sharing with my wife, or even people who are very close to me, I know they won't completely understand what I'm going through, and that's okay. I think the environment is not for them to really, at least for me, to completely understand, but just to be there, so I could be like, hey, I'm not doing well, you're not going to understand why I'm not doing well. In some ways, it'll annoy me if you think you know how I'm doing or how well or not well I'm doing. But I know that you're there. You're going to be there. If some things, some of the tangible like things we don't think about, like a lot of things that happens when you're grieving or you're struggling, is you forget yourself. You forget everything else. So your friend being like, I don't know what to deal or what to do, but here's some food. Go. Or something very tangible, very easy. Or hey, you're not having a good day. I'm not an expert. I'm not very familiar. Especially our parents, generation above us. They hadn't have to deal with a lot of this stuff or was familiar. So having a little grace to them, I try to do, because it's kind of, my mom's South Korean, like I mentioned, and my dad's Spanish. So it's like two cultures from different parts of the world. Being understanding your context. I say this to myself and those who I work with and help sometimes, is personalize your care. What's going on with you, but don't let external things personalize you. So like a lot of times things happen, DMVs, you go try to get care or whatever, it doesn't work out, nurses doesn't call you back. It's not inherently that they're out to get you. It's so I've learned, at least for me, navigating through that, is not to take those things externally personal, but your care, if it's not working, if the medicine's not working, if the treatment's not working, take that personal and find something a little bit better, and the environment can provide that. An African proverb I like a lot, and I think a lot of people, at least nowadays, should read this, is if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We're not islands. This kind of promotes the idea that we kind of want to race through. But what are your thoughts when you hear this proverb, African proverb, and anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you brought up culture, because I think in the United States, at least, we are very individualistic. Like we kind of like to do our own thing and have control and be very private in our lives and keep everything to ourselves, versus doing things more as a community or a neighborhood or like extended family. I think a lot of other cultures are much more like that, where they more see it as a group or a family or a tribe, or so there's more of a feeling of belonging that can come with other cultures. I've lived overseas some, and I've experienced that and think that's very powerful. And I think that's something that living in the United States it can be hard in some ways, because we don't naturally have that unless you try to create it, which in my experience, I have found a lot of resistance, because people like their privacy. They like to be in their own house. They like to, they don't like people, they don't like people intruding on them. Even like when we try to have all of our neighbors over for dinner, and like, just kind of, and sometimes they're like, why do you want us have over, why do you want to have us over for dinner? I'm like, well, because we're trying to, build community. We're trying to be in each other's lives. And so I think there's so much value in having, because we all go through difficult times, difficult things, even if it's not the same thing. There's so much value in having the stability of being a part of something, and having different gifts, different talents, different, we all are so different, the way that we are built and made, our personalities, our gifts. And so being able to kind of draw on each other's strengths and like help each other out in our weaknesses is just so beautiful. And it's something I think we miss out on if we are just keep everything to ourselves.
I totally agree, and I feel it's a missed opportunity, because it's easy to agree with the people who think like you, speak like you, talk like you, agree with you. A lot of times we don't want to be around the people too much who don't think or speak, but you learn a lot. Community. What I learned, especially being a church leader, is that it's very complicated when it comes to people in general. It doesn't, even if the church looks very close, and you have someone maybe struggling with cancer, a family member who's just beat cancer or is in remission, as a leader, I was also remember the other person who just lost a person with cancer in the same congregation. We're saying hallelujah, amen, all this stuff, and another person's on the side. If no one talks to them or anything, it does feel that good news, someone's good news, seem maybe someone's bad news. So like navigating through that, not people are like, oh, that's a lot. Well, it is a lot. Communication is hard if you really think about it. When someone's born deaf or can't speak or have these limitations, and what's one of the first things they kind of address? How do they communicate? We have Braille. We have all these things that we do to kind of mitigate so that that person has still ways to communicate with their parents, with the world around them. So I find it kind of, as we have sensory overload with our computers and tablets, and we kind of, it's kind of comical, but almost a little bit depressing in some ways, that we just have a lax approach about it. We can't afford to put ourselves out there. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I think because it's uncomfortable, sometimes that's okay. It's probably going to be expected that some conversations won't be super comfortable. I do believe with COVID, it kind of pushed pause on everything, and a lot of people were kind of got used to the delivery person used to knock at the door and you open it and you get it. Now I'll admit it, I'm like, contactless, just leave it out there. I'm like, wow. But at the same time, I was thinking of the idea of what this African proverb says. My wife has this untranslatable words book, and I love it. It's from one of them is Ubuntu. I'm probably apologize to South Africans listening to me, but it says, I find my worth in you and you find my worth in me. You don't have to, you can value someone who doesn't agree with you. You can value someone who may not see eye to eye. You just understand that we are all in this human condition that we do. We're constantly changing. We don't have all the answers. We're not awesome sauce. And sometimes but I think that kind of balance has a lot of potential to kind of communicate and build these more stable environments around you, because the expectation levels are a little bit more clearer. I don't know. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, communication is just to touch on that. I think it's so important, and I think we have really lost the art of being able to have different opinions and yet still relate and be okay with that. I think I've seen so much division, especially in the last probably like 5 years, just political or, just a lot of different issues, that just all of a sudden drive a wedge, and then people can't even relate anymore because that becomes too important, versus just saying, okay, well, it's okay for us to have different, like you said, it's okay to have different perspectives, different opinions. Like, that's fine, right? We're not going to all think alike. And then there's so much value in, God created us to be relational beings, to be in community, and I think being able, when we're able to look outside of our, at least what I found in my experience, like when I'm able to, even if you're like struggling with whatever it is, and it can become very absorbed, you can become so absorbed or focused on that issue. When somebody else steps in, there's such a freedom and a joy to be able to focus on someone else and to bring them into your issue, whatever, but then also to realize that you also have something to offer. We all have, I'm just amazed sometimes, like, just for example, like when I go to the grocery store, there's some like people who, are checking out, who, or like the cash register person is just so full of life, full of joy, just like makes comments and like changes your whole day. And you're like, I didn't even know that person, but they're just, you can just tell they're just like life-giving people. And so every single one of our interactions with our fellow human beings, whether we know them well or not, it's amazing that we have the power within us to like do something to their day, right? Is that going to be good or bad? We have the choice, but it's just, yeah, we all affect each other, and
Yeah.
it's just something to be so good to be aware of.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because a lot of times, people are busy. We're always so busy. Oh, how are you doing? It's no longer okay. Oh, I'm busy, and I'm not minimizing that, but some people are like, "Well, I want to help." Well, you just mentioned being kind. Words matter. Like if you go out and you're just kind to someone, you don't know how much that will impact them because you don't know what they're doing. You could just say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Or you could just hold the door open. You just be there. A lot of times, we're just we never have enough time. Time is a kind of subjective thing. We either have too much of it or not enough of it, and it's we're never really satisfied. And when we're looking at life, I kind of I like the idea that we're always kind of incomplete, and that sounds weird to say, but it's a constant. If we're okay with that, then the fact that we'll have issues or we have problems that we have to work through is not surprising. This enoughness, this can be, I guess, kind of crippling for those who like, only if I get this, only if I get this job, this title. You mentioned that cash register who was just full of life. It reminds me of Martin Luther King saying, "Whatever you do, if you're a sweeper, be the best sweeper, and like just do you." Like and I feel a lot of times we, being honest, it's scary out there. The world is scary when it comes to the uncertainty. But I long same quote from Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the full staircase to take the first step. So really, sometimes it's just one day at a time, one thing at a time, whatever that is. If your best day is, I have not gone out of the house, I've been feeling miserable, I lost a family member. A lot of people have lost people during COVID or just through illness, through whatever that may be. A lot of times the hardest time is after the funeral, after everything gets back to normal, because then everything gets back to normal. Maybe you're just, the biggest thing you do is go out for a walk. I've seen or go out the room. Maybe have a friend over. Maybe your friend brings you food or something, or whatever. Um, that may be your success for that day, because success, I feel, is very subjective. We kind of look at what society says what success is, but success is, I think we may have met the most successful people because their success is subjected to what they feel is success. So I feel that for me, has helped in the idea when it comes to when we this urgency. You're only on your own time when it comes to this stuff. Life is way too short, especially when you see how quickly it could be gone. We talk about brief, thinking about World Suicide Day. People would argue, I don't want to talk about it. Well, some of the most difficult topics are the ones we need to talk about, and not directly, but just to recognize that I know that everyone has a level of experience, a level of comfort, but at least paying tribute to those who are lost, who are not here anymore when it comes to World Suicide Day, because it impacts everyone. On the other side, those who are struggling with recovery, substance use, dual diagnosis, understand that if it's nice to get that chip for those people. I know working with them, like, I haven't been sober for 5 years. That's great, but you're still you. So if you do slip, I want you to be able to say, I need help, and we'll get back on it, because it's never about, these milestones are nice to remember, but you and understand. But Lao Tzu says life can only be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. So you're kind of looking at how life eventually has to progress forward. I want to pause and give you an opportunity to kind of share. You're new to the podcast, and I want to ask if you want to share anything about yourself. Share what brought you to what you're doing today. Anything you want to share with the listeners that you're comfortable with.
Sure. So to go back a little bit, I started back almost 18 years ago, I developed some chronic health conditions and continue to have them to this day. So I've had several different diagnoses, and so I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but it's basically been in and out of the hospital, a lot of different organ problems, heart problems. I have Lyme disease is one of the things. So I have neuropathy and a lot of other stomach issues. So there's I've lived a long, I'd always been healthy before that. And it was kind of a surprise to all of a sudden be in a body where things were not functioning well. And so it took me a few years to kind of realize, wow, this is not just going to go away. I need to learn how to live in a new way, right? I need to learn how to live with a body that is in pain a lot, where I have limitations, where I can't do the things I used to do. I can't eat the things I used to eat. And it was really, I hit a point about 6 years ago now where it was a very low point, so I never really, I would say I was to the point where I felt like I didn't want to live anymore. I'm like, this is just, there's too much pain. There's too much, like my body is just, I was like, if I could just step outside of my body and leave it behind, that would be great. But obviously we can't do that. But I just, I was a very low point, and God really just spoke to me during that time and said, Karis, I want you to start writing. And at that point, I was like, what am I going to write about? I feel at loss for any hope or words or anything to say. But after a few weeks, I just started processing, how a lot of questions I was having and struggles. And it was actually very good for me personally, because I'm more of I process well through writing. So I would say it was very therapeutic. And then I started a Facebook group called Suffering Well, and a blog, and just realizing that there are so many people out there who just needed words of hope and encouragement. And it was really my relationship with God and the hope that came from His Word on a daily basis that gave me what I needed to keep going each day. And then last year, I ended up taking a lot of what I had written and wrote a book, which is called Suffering Redeemed: Finding Strength to Endure, Purpose in Pain, and Hope for Tomorrow. And it was hard, because a lot of what I had written, I didn't intend to share it publicly. But at the same time, I think it's really valuable because it was so raw, right? It was so, it was something that I probably wouldn't have shared in that way had I known I was writing a book. So God really used that. And so I feel like, someone told me once, your misery becomes your ministry. And I've seen that in my life. Like, God has really opened this up for me as a way to give hope, to share my faith, to share, to even to bring me joy, because in reaching out to others, I have just found so many doors opening to connect with people who are really struggling. And I'm still, every day is still hard for me in a lot of ways, but I think I've also found, just like I've learned how to take. I love the theme, one more day, right? That's what we have to do. It's like, okay, yeah. But there's a passage that I just wanted to share that I've gone back to time and time again, and I think it's very relevant for the topic today. So it's 2 Corinthians 1:8-10, where Paul is talking to the Corinthian church, and he says, for we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will continue to deliver us. On him we have set our hope, that he will deliver us again. So I think that speaks so clearly to my own testimony, and also just the relevance of the topic today, that, oftentimes in this life, we're going to feel utterly burdened beyond our strength, that we despair of life. And I've felt that many days, whether it be, whatever you're going through, addiction or trauma or loss, grief, illness, financial trouble. There's so many different issues in our lives that can make us feel despairing, right? And our feelings can go up and down based on our circumstances. But that desperation can bring us to a reliance upon God that I have found personally to be so beneficial, so fulfilling. I've just found God to be so faithful, walking through every hardship that I've gone through. And that really is the hope that gets me out of bed every day, is knowing that whatever the day will hold, I can trust that He'll be there. And the deliverance that we want in our lives, whether it be heal, like for me, it's healing. Like I long and I pray to be healed. And yet, I do what I can to be healthy, but then ultimately there's some things that are not in our control. And then I have to give that over to God and say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you with the outcome of this, and keep my eyes on you. So that's kind of where I am today.
Thank you for sharing. Those who are listening, I guess I'll put the notes for them to get, find your book and find more information on that, and below. So when those who are listening, you just scroll down to the notes, you'll be able to click the link or find your way to, if you want to find out more about Karis's book. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. I think when it comes to like I say, because I treat this podcast as purely like an outreach ministry, the goal is that we continue to talk, that we don't throw this under the rug, that we provide hope. And the idea that, you're not alone, those who are suffering, those who have stories. But at the same time, I myself, my background is being Christian. And listening to your story, I just remember coming to things didn't work out, come to live with my father at first. And he said, "Hell, you want to go to the prayer meeting?" I'm like, that sounds horrible. And I did. And I went to prayer. And then the thing that was funny, and this is what I'm telling those who are listening, whether you're just even you're agnostic or atheist, or you're not really into that. But one thing that I felt was helpful was the consistency. And one thing, when I was in high school, I did sound, so I did music stuff, and they needed a sound guy, so I became the sound person. So I wouldn't even listen to the sermons or anything, but I said to myself at first, I'm like, let me at least make them sound good. So I tried to work on the volume and all that stuff. So I focused on that thing that I could control, and that was it. And then later on, like life happens, similar probably to your story in some ways, that that wasn't it for me, and I just got more and more and more involved. Because when I first went to my father's, I wasn't doing well, and I remember my recovery was, I guess my serving others became my recovery, my helping others became my healing, that kind of, and I just dived into it. I realized, I think 4 years right now or so. When I started Revive Ministry, it wasn't a podcast at first. Actually, locally, I just had events for like suicide and mental health month. I had people come and speakers. I had people who did music and all this stuff. It was just something to bring the community together. And then when it was kind of weird foreshadowing, because in 2019, I didn't even know about COVID. It didn't happen yet. It was like in fall when I started this podcast starting. And I was hesitant at first, but I just remember being, just diving in. So you're not going to know every single angle or corner, but I do commend you for doing that because it was out of my comfort zone. I didn't want to initially, like, I thought, podcasting, like, why would I do this? But it's honestly now I'm like, why would I ever stop? So I do appreciate what, every guest that come on and share more. I want to just as segue, as we wrap up our episode. I just want to ask you, what would you think a society can understand from navigating, like, from your opinion? And I know your story is different, but what do you think society can understand as we navigate forward regarding recovery, regarding anything we talked about? And what have you seen or experienced that has worked? You mentioned your own personal journey and testimony, but what have you seen, even those around you maybe struggling, that has worked when it comes to kind of navigating, whether it's medical issues, that your chronic pain, because pain is no joke, as you're constant, or anything else that you've experienced? Or
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind first is that it's a process, right? We like we like quick fixes. And I think more and more as modern technology advances, we don't like to wait for things. We want things now, and we don't like process. But I think in our lives, especially when things are ongoing and our bodies are so complicated and interwoven, right? So our mental health affects our physical health and our, emotional health and our relationships and in our environment, and there's just so many factors, and it's not something that we can just rush through and like pop a pill, right? I think the doctors, like when I go to the doctor, I've learned this through many, many doctor's appointments, is that oftentimes they just like to mask the symptoms. They're like, oh, you're having this issue? Okay, we'll take this and it'll go away. Well, no, it doesn't really go away. It kind of masks the symptom and I still have the root problem and now it's causing other problems, and then they just give more medication. So I just see it so much in society that's what we do, not just medically, but in other areas. We have a trauma from our childhood, whether it be big or small, like it's still affecting us somehow. And then we're numbing it through whatever, it could be drugs, or it could be something like, binge watching TV, just trying to like escape instead of saying, okay, I need to take time to face this. It's okay. It's okay to face the pain and the weakness. It's okay to just drive away all the stigma that's involved with having issues, whatever it is, right? We all have. Some people hide them better. Some people, but we're all human. We all understand that we don't have it together, and that's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that we should try to hide. And for me, my experience, for the first several years, I just tried to be strong enough. I didn't share how much pain I was in. I didn't share how much fear I had every day, like with what was going on with me physically. I just thought I was giving people, a break. I didn't want to be a burden to people, right? I didn't want to come across as complaining or whatever. And so I just kind of kept everything inside. I mean, I didn't even share with my husband really what was going on, because he was deployed. He had a lot going on. But, it came to a point where I was like, I actually can't do this anymore. And maybe out of pride, I was thinking I can handle it. I don't need to, so just there's a humility, I think, that comes with struggles that we have to realize, no, I actually do need help. And it's amazing how much support I received and how much love and comfort and whatever when I actually opened up and asked people and said, actually, this is really, really hard, and you're giving people a gift in some ways, I think, by sharing with them, because that's what we're created to do. Just like you were saying, a part of your recovery was helping other people, right? And so that's something that I think we that gives fulfillment when we're able to reach out and help someone else who's struggling. And so yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, and you mentioned time. I think a lot of times, when is there ever time for so and so? Like you're like, oh, I'm doing this, and there's always something, and there's sometimes the barriers themselves, the person themselves. So it's like, well, this didn't show up, and it's not really related to what they're going through. Sometimes it's just time is, and we're talking about, as you mentioned, how society understands when it comes to how we respond to recovery. We talk about masking and some of the symptoms, but when we value, I mentioned before, when we personalize our care, we value our time, when we value, oh, I want to be better. I don't want to just seem better. I also want to be okay, better, that people don't feel like a burden. Like you said, you were surprised at the amount of support when you actually did open up. And like, granted, it's going to be different for everyone listening. I'm not saying there's going to be a level of adjustment when you are, and barriers and boundaries are going to be appropriate. At the same time, you're going to have your own space. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones inside that you have to kind of sort out. It's kind of overwhelming to kind of expect everyone to understand every single thing that I'm going through. But hey, they've been there. They helped me with this, getting me here and there, and having that kind of talk in inner reflection that we sometimes just look at the negative and forget the positives that are happening around you. So I like, and in regards to what I think it's important to remind ourselves that we are getting a second opinion, treating things, your own care, as a priority is not a bad thing. I think the hardest thing to see is people, oh, the medication's not working. Let's say mental health provider. I work with them in the field, and I'm like, well, did you tell the provider? No, I don't want them to feel bad. And it sounds funny for those who are outside, but understand some of these situations, they have no one talking to them. They don't feel heard at all. But the person is not understanding that they don't tell the person that it's not working, then they're not helping the person who is trying to help them. So personalize your care. But at the same time, I want to ask you as we wrap up, how would you like people to remember this month? Recovery Month, World Suicide Day, 2023 edition, I guess. It's going to be different each year, and I feel that's important. It's good that we remember, but just what are your thoughts? What would you like people to remember this year?
So I think, it comes down to individuals, and if this could be a day or a month or a year of somebody turning a corner, either the individual or somebody who's helping someone else or supporting them, like what a great way to remember it. Like 2023 was the time when I blank, and turned a corner in my life, decided to change, decided to become sober, decided to get help, decided to start seeing a counselor, whatever they need. I think there's a turning point where someone has to come and have the motivation, like, okay, I actually need to change. Something needs to happen, and then get that accountability and kind of do a 180, and I think that is probably such a huge thing when that decision happens.
Yeah, and I think forgiving ourselves and the ones around us, sometimes forgiveness is overlooked in this process. We are our own worst critics. A lot of times, we may not have the insight that we do now, and that's a part of the journey and part of the growth. And I do think, even if it's small, today, this year, 2023, I I told someone that I'm really struggling. I don't know where it's going after that,
Mhm.
but each day is kind of up and down. But at least I told someone because I didn't want to tell. That's I like people to remember that one of our fundamental blessings, I would say, is that we can communicate. Well, like I said it before, if you know, we strive and we see the importance, even though we don't recognize it. Those who are unable to speak or to even see, or however, we find ways for them to communicate. There's so many different languages, the sign languages. There's so many different ways to communicate. Let us not let us not just put it aside uh, recklessly. Let us be intentional with our communication. You may not have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. But at the same time, we're going through this step by step, one day at a time. So that's what, like, at the same time, when I think of 2023, I think that is that these problems probably span 10 years or more. That those who are struggling, um, don't worry about what other people may think. Start worrying and looking inward, and what will help you in the long run. And with that said, and I'm gonna ask your final thoughts, but you mentioned this before, but what does one more day mean to you? The theme of this month.
Mm. So sometimes one more day even feels like too much. So for me, sometimes I think like make it through the next hour, right? Or make it through the next minute, or
Yeah.
um, but there's two things that come to mind. One is where another Bible verse where Jesus says, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself.
Yeah.
And just how like we often worry about what are we going to do tomorrow? What is going to happen tomorrow or next year or whatever, instead of just taking it a day at a time and trying to just focus on, okay, what can I do today for myself or for someone else to get through? And then so like I said before we got on, yesterday was a very hard day for me physically. So some days I have a lot more pain and than others, and I just all day I was just like, oh, I just cannot wait until I can go to bed and like have the day be over. And this morning I read Psalm 30 verse 5, which says, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And weeping or sorrow or whatever, I think there is just something about a new day, each new sunrise, that is such a mercy that we have a fresh start to think like, okay, tomorrow's another day, and we can forget what happened yesterday. We don't have to live in bondage to how we lived or felt or made, in the past. I think it's just each new day, I see it as a gift that we are given.
You brought up some one of my favorite verses. I'll just share this since you shared a few. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10. It says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insult, and hardship, in persecution, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." It's one of those pivotal ones I do like. Those who, when it comes to when we process pain, when we think about if today's the only day, if remember that one song. When we have that urgency, oh, tonight's the night, it has to happen tonight, it doesn't really give us much room, or doesn't really give us grace for ourselves. Recovery takes time. Surround yourself with positive people. One more day, maybe one more. I remember when, when you're working out in the gym and the person's like, you're doing like, I don't know, whatever you're doing, maybe bench, like one more, and you're like, no. And they're like three more, and you already did three, and they're like one more. I'm like, no. But at the end you're like, but the person is just trying to push you, and sometimes having a good environment can help you say, hey, I'm not doing well. You may not have all the answers, your friend, your family, those people around you. But surround yourself, like I said in the beginning, with people that you can actually say, I need help. If you can't say that, find somewhere you can. I need help. Final thoughts as we wrap up.
So I think hope is such an important thing to keep in mind, to have hope, to keep going, and to not lose hope, because something I've been reading a lot of, like autobiographies of people who went through the concentration camps, and just some of the most extreme suffering in the world, and yet the main difference from those who made it and didn't was their mental, like, losing hope, right? So when they thought, oh, I don't have any reason to live, I don't have a purpose, there's no reason to live, then they couldn't survive. But those who had a hope, those who had a purpose, who had something to live for, no matter, they were the ones that were able, they've done so many studies on this. It's just so interesting that our minds are so powerful, and how our bodies react. And so just take, we have to be careful of what our thoughts are and what we're dwelling upon. And it makes a huge difference in our lives.
Yeah. And I read, Viktor Frankl, obviously one notable, and just remember, it's not the blind optimism that people like. Yeah, if those, you can be like, oh yeah, next February will be great. It's just too much pressure. Sometimes that's what kind of led me to this title. The theme was one more day. You can only control what you can control. That's it. The people who did well had purpose, had hope, but some days all they can control is, I'm gonna just, whether, let's say you're struggling with alcoholism, I'm gonna try to not drink today. I'm gonna try to surround myself. Maybe I'll go to a church group. Maybe I'll go out to the gym. Maybe I just call my friend, call my sponsor. I just need to take care of today. Don't worry about tomorrow. I'll take care of today. And and understanding the should-haves, like, they need to be out the window, because those should-haves, they really don't get you anywhere. I should be somewhere else. Well, you're here. You're here, and you're you, and you're not defined by your diagnosis. You're not defined by anything like that. Diagnosis help with the treatment. It doesn't change that you're still Susan, Sarah, Josh, whoever you are. You're still that person. And remember that your identity, whether you're suffering, does not change. You're still who you are. I want to say thank you so much for joining us and just being part of the conversation, Karis. It's nice to just have time, takes time apart on our busy schedules and say, hey, this is important. One more day is important. I never really get bogged down by the statistics when it comes to suicide, because it fluctuates, but it always is increases. It may go down one year, but one life is too much if we really think about it. So, like, I don't want us to be a numbers game, but it's important to kind of see that it's something that we're reminded and pay tribute that those who are around, those who are suffering, if you're overwhelmed and you're just trying to help someone, just get help. Find a resource. You don't have to do it yourself. You're not Superman. You're not Superwoman. You just need to find help. And if you need help, ask it. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries through various platforms. ReviveMinistriesFL.com is our website. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries. Leaving with last quote from Juliette Lewis. She said, "The bravest thing I ever did was continue my life when I wanted to die."